tap in. Gotta get this right. Let me know when y'all in attendance, family. I had to restart it. So let me know when y'all ready. Oh shit, I can play that too though. Be ready, family. I had to start it over, so excuse me on that. Okay, coach with me. All right, we about to get it started then. We just gonna get straight into it. Apologies, family. Here we go.
Back in the 70s, a man named Dr. William Shockley, with his controversial views. On campus after campus, unrest followed his every genetics. Now let's find out what the controversy is about. Dr. Shockley, please give us the benefit, basically, of what your theory is.
My principal point, Mr. Brown, is not so much a theory of black-white differences, but is summed up in one word, which is the theme of my appearance on your program and my efforts, and the word is dysgenics. And dysgenics means effectively downbreeding, retrogressive evolution. And I fear that this is worst for the black community, and I particularly welcome an opportunity to appear on Black Journal just for these reasons. And let me say also that when I first met Dr. Welsing, it was not black students who were disrupting, but white students. And Dr. Welsing made a very sincere and I thought extremely effective effort, a well-planned effort. It was not effective with these white students at Staten Island Community College, so I would have a chance to speak.
Make sure to share.
In fact, I think they prevented her from saying what she wanted to say when she was trying to gain me a platform. So my main theme is that we have problems that we should face and we should look at connected with dysgenics. And I welcome any opportunity I have to bring this out so that people can look at it and worry about it.
Dr. Shockley, you are accused of having a theory that is a white racist theory. How do you respond to that?
Well, I respond to that by saying that I've considered whether or not I am a racist. Racist is an epithet that used to damage my self-esteem, but it doesn't anymore. I feel it's untrue. If you look in the dictionary as to what racist means, it means emotional feelings, irrational feelings associated with fear and hate. If I really had those, I don't think I would be here this evening. I feel that what I'm engaged in is a demand for diagnosis, and I'd like to say some more about this chart, which we'll come to probably later, which shows the disproportionate rates of reproduction for the least effective elements of the black community. I'd like to say more about that than we should in just this brief introduction. But I think there is another word that better describes what I'm involved in, and that word is raceology, which means a scientific analysis of racial differences. And I basically have a faith that reason is a good thing, and I feel, as you do about the First Amendment, but maybe with a slightly different emphasis. I think the really important thing about the First Amendment is it is a way of guaranteeing a high likelihood that truth will emerge as a result of conflicting ideas being expressed, and I have a thesis and a basic belief that truth is a good thing and will be of benefit to man.
Thank you. Dr. Frances Welsing, give us the benefit of your theory, please.
Well, my theory was, I wrote the paper in 1969. I wrote a paper called The Cress Theory of Color Confrontation and Racism. And the sole reason behind writing that paper was an attempt to understand the behavior of white people in relationship to all people of color, every place in the world, black, brown, red, and yellow people. And the paper was presented to the Americans at the National Medical Association, the section on psychiatry in neurology, because back in 1969, the Black Caucus in the American Psychiatric Association, we had said that racism, and when we talk about racism, we're talking about the white supremacy behavior of white people. That racism was the #1 mental health problem in the nation, and it was the #1 cause of other mental health problems. And I wanted to understand what this thing of racism really is all about, because it's the thing that has caused woe and misery and suffering for the vast majority of the people on this planet that are classified as non-white. And in my attempt to understand why the necessity of white people to keep saying that white is superior and that the condition of non-white is inferior, and the more I thought about it, in conjunction with an idea that a friend of mine had, that racism was a worldwide behavioral system for the maintenance of white supremacy by a small minority of people. I put those ideas together with what we know about genetics, what we know about the condition of skin whiteness itself. The condition of skin whiteness is the genetic inability to produce skin pigment called melanin. This is a genetic recessive trait. It is a genetic deficiency state, not as defined by Francis Welsing, but defined by geneticists and dermatologists, that the inability to produce the skin pigment of melanin or melanin pigment is described as albinism. And I think that white people, even though most white people are not consciously understanding their problem in genetics, they are certainly aware that they are genetically dominated by people of color. That's why it was a statement, one drop of black blood makes you black, because people of color have the genetic capacity to annihilate white people. And so unless white people control the reproductivity of people of color, then we can postulate that perhaps one day there won't be any white people. And I think that the very survival of white people necessitates that they project genetic inferiority on people of color, because it is they who really are aware that they are genetic recessive and perhaps genetically inferior to people of color. And I am not saying this to call the condition of skin whiteness to say, well, no, white people are inferior. I'm not saying it for that purpose, but I think that it is of prime importance for the majority of people in the world to understand why it is that white people have to, the effective majority, large numbers of white people, have to move in a hostile and an aggressive way against people of color, and have to constantly focus on it's you who's genetically inferior, because they realize that there's something wrong with their genetic status. Now,
may I take a call?
Oh, sure,
all right.
please.
Let me, so that, because we have a number of calls, and we'll see what the public wants to find out also. Just 1 second.
Share this one. This is the one you should share.
Hello, go ahead, please. You're on
Share
Black Journal.
I would like to ask the question, why does the doctor feel that his theory, Dr. Shockley, why did you feel that your theory is correct?
Well, let me say that's a long question. Let me point out one aspect. It's a question that calls for a very long answer. I think I might just at this point say that in a time like 1 hour, we may expose a problem and encourage thinking about it, and this is a very valuable thing. But to cover either Dr. Welsing's views or mine, and let me say here are, just to show that these things exist, is a pamphlet that she was good enough to give me some time ago.
This one's upside down.
Well, that one's upside down.
Yeah,
thank you.
Right.
And this is one of my own. It's actually a collection of a debate.
The Imperatives of Ethnic Education is yours.
This is the issue of the journal. Mine was, the title of my paper is somewhat different from this, but I want to say that, speaking for myself, if people would like to write to me at Stanford University, I have a post box there, Post Box S, which is the same as Shockley and Stanford. I will try to supply more information, and I'm sure Dr. Welsing will say what she can do about telling people how to reach her pamphlet. But now let me say this chart that I held up a moment ago is very important in respect to this question of why I think there may be what proves a basic difference. But I'm going to say that if there were not a basic difference in intellectual capacity in the past, there probably will be a basic difference between black and white intellectual capacity in the future, simply because of the reproduction patterns. And these are Census Bureau data, and this is the most
1974, by the way.
And what it indicates is that for the black women of the lowest intellectual social class, which are rural farm women, generally the education is least, the average number of children is 5.4. For women with college degrees, it's 1.9. And so this is definitely unfavorable. It is reproducing far more at the bottom end and not enough to keep even at the top end.
Dr. Shockley, can
for
you
whites, let me just finish this. For whites, the numbers are also in this direction, but nowhere nearly as severe.
Dr. Shockley, I think that in all fairness, you should explain to the audience why it is that you have, first of all, you have a very large segment of the black population who are on farms, who are deprived in cities. Why don't you explain at the time that you're showing this, Who is keeping black people in a situation like they're in? I mean, it could be, you could turn it around the other way, where you could have very large numbers of black people who are exposed to educational opportunities like white people, who are exposed to housing, who are exposed to health facilities. Why don't you explain that at the same time that you put figures like that?
I'm sure you would explain it,
no, but
Dr.
I think
Welsing,
it's important
but
in
one must say first things first.
Mm-hmm.
And you've raised the basic question there, and that is whether the disadvantages are primarily a lack of opportunity or whether they are primarily a basic genetic difference. And let me mention one thing, which is that in certain areas there is no doubt about black superiority. Blacks are superior in visual acuity, and they're superior in a systematic way. Now, I don't expect that people will understand the details of this, but I simply want to show that quantitative work can be done. This happens to be a research job of my own, and what it shows, because these points that you see here lie on a line which is not the central line, but they lie systematically on a line, what it says is that so far as visual acuity is concerned, blacks are systematically better than whites. It's as if their bell-shaped curve, their distribution curve, were pushed upwards compared to whites for visual acuity, or at least for the avoidance of bad eyesight, such that if the same shift occurred for IQ, it would mean that the average IQ distribution would be up by 9 points rather than down by about 15 points, which is the typical average.
Dr. Shockley, visual acuity is probably something that the system of white supremacy has not necessarily seen the need to affect the environment that black people are in so that it will alter the fact that they have visual acuity that is superior to whites. The fact of visual acuity is not attacked in the same way as educational opportunity and job performance is attacked. And I think that
it's evidence for a genetic difference.
Well, you see what I'm saying? There might be many, many more genetic differences where people of color appear superior.
If I may, we have a number of people, and we'd like to get to as many as possible. If you could make your answers as, not to compromise your explanation, but if you could make your answers as succinct, I would appreciate it, because we'd like to involve the public as much as we can. One moment, please.
Matt Fratt, salute. Scorpion Goddess, peace, guys.
You're on Black Journal. Go ahead, please.
Yes, I was wondering if Dr. Shockley could explain the basic difference between the course he is taking and explaining white supremacy and the course that Hitler took during the Nazism reign.
Thank you.
Well, there are enormous differences. In fact, the lesson to be learned from Nazi history is frequently very misunderstood. And it is a lesson which Mr. Brown has told us about earlier. It's the First Amendment. It's not that eugenics is intolerable. Actually, the eugenic programs, which are the opposite of dysgenics, eugenic programs are not inconceivable. They're not inhumane. Denmark has been carrying out programs with strong eugenic implications for maybe 30 years. And it's important to note that since World War II, Denmark's per capita homicide rate dropped and is now approximately 1/20th. That is, the number of deaths of probability of being killed in a year by a violent homicide is roughly the order of 100 times less for young Danes than it is for young American blacks. Now, but the lesson, let me say what the lesson of Nazi history we have in this country, and it will protect us. It's just the thing that makes this program possible. The First Amendment, which allows freedom of speech. If one believes that is not the right answer, then one has to be one of the most anti-German racists that can be. If one believes that the German people would have tolerated the concentration camps and the gas chambers, if news media, like the programs that Mr. Brown is setting on, if those people were willing to bring discordant views out into the open, I don't believe the concentration camps and the gas chambers could have continued to exist in Germany.
I'd like to comment, because I'd like to say that I don't think that there's a major difference between what Dr. Shockley is doing. I don't think that Dr. Shockley is fully aware of what he is doing and why he is doing what he's doing. But the long-range implications of what he is doing are no different than the propaganda campaign that Hitler and his Nazi unit carried on in Germany that ended up eliminating 6 million Jewish people. Now, what is most interesting is that Hitler said the very same thing. He said, number one, that the Jews were genetically inferior to the Aryans. Number two, he was aware that the Semites had genetically dominant genetic material to the Aryans. And if we begin to understand the way that people who were in Europe at the time that the Semites arrived from Africa, when the Semites arrived in Europe from Africa, they were people who had substantial amounts of color and who had very kinky hair because they were from the continent of Africa. And the Europeans, the white people who were there, had a reaction, a color reaction to the Semites that is no different than the reaction and the concern on the part of people who are white in this area of the world or any other area of the world to people who have the genetic capacity to produce color, who can genetically annihilate their position. And I think it's very, very important. Even though Dr. Shockley, I am convinced that Dr. Shockley believes that he is perhaps elevating science with all of his charts and all of his figures, but he doesn't understand the things that propel him as a white individual in a social system that has programmed him throughout his life and programmed large numbers of people like him to focus on the genetics of people of color in such a way as to destroy people of color.
I would like to ask a question, and Dr. Shockley, if you could answer it yes or no, I would appreciate it. Do you believe that black people are inferior in intelligence because of their heredity?
I have a standard statement. It is not yes or no. It's memorized. I say at the same time every time I think. What I say is this. My research leads me, and it's a tragic conclusion really, my research leads me inescapably to the opinion that the major cause of the American Negro's intellectual and social deficits is hereditary and racially genetic in origin, and thus not remediable to a major degree by practical improvements in environment.
All right, if you believe that the position relatively of black Americans to white Americans is based on a genetic inferiority, and I will accept the responsibility for that word, then what do you see as the solution to the problem?
Well, I see the first aspect of this is to prevent the problem from becoming worse by dysgenics. This first word
that I translate dysgenics for me and the audience? Would that be sterilization?
No. Dysgenics, you see, means what that other chart I showed you says.
Should blacks,
the least effective element.
Should blacks be sterilized?
No. I have a...
this but if then blacks are a problem, and we do not allow...
This is inhumane. And I think one can find more humane solutions to this.
Well, then how would... Then
I would propose something in which one of the key phrases is regardless of sex, race, or welfare status. And this is the proposal. I call it a thinking exercise. It's mentioned in that pamphlet that I showed that you can obtain. And it goes this way, that you would offer a bonus to everyone to be sterilized. Now, we know we have a population explosion problem. We know that in India, that bonuses in the form of transistor radios are offered to people.
Would this bonus be directed to black people specifically, more than whites?
Mr. Brown, what did I say just a moment ago? I said, regardless of sex, race, or welfare status.
Now, there is a group.
That's what I say.
There is a group of white people to whom this offer should be made also.
Absolutely. Now the offer is based upon the best estimates, best scientific estimates that one can have of any genetically carried disabilities. Now there are some, I think, that any humane person would have no doubt about. And Dr. Welsing talked about dominant and recessive genes. I want to point out that sometimes a dominant gene can be a very bad thing, and it is a very bad thing for a neurological disease called Huntington's chorea, which is something like multiple sclerosis.
More prominent in white people than black people.
That is correct. And I think that one should offer a large bonus for anyone who might be potentially carrying Huntington's chorea.
Dr. Shockley,
beyond this, it goes on with some other factors in this, but Dr. Welsing wishes to speak.
Are you aware that white people have more genetic diseases that affect their nervous system than people of color than black people?
I wouldn't be at all surprised, and I think blacks apparently have higher heart.
Would you suggest that all of these white people who are carrying these defective genes, you know, whose families may carry these defective genes, that they be examined and it would be suggested to them that they be sterilized? Would you suggest this?
Yes, I think I would, probably, in general.
Go ahead, your Unblack Journal, please.
What we know about ancient black civilizations, how can American blacks suddenly be genetically regressive?
Thank you.
Let me just say this. What is very interesting is in the study of biology, biologists who have studied evolution, one of the very interesting things that they say is that the more functional skin pigment cells in the animal kingdom, the higher you are on the scale of phylogenetic ascension. In other words, nature in the course of evolution went to its highest state when it produced a cell that could produce pigment, and that we were sliding backwards. The mutation to albinism is a step backwards in the scale of evolution. Are you aware of that, Dr. Shockley?
Cress, Welsing, Part
No,
2.
I'm not aware of that particular one. I am aware of another basic genetic difference, and that is that the rate of maturation of a neurological system gets longer and longer the more advanced the animal is. And that is one of the items on the racial difference, that the neurological development of blacks is faster than whites. Black babies walk on the average a month earlier than white babies. And the period of
black
gestation...
people are much more creative also than white.
Dr. Wells, Shockley, correct me if I'm incorrect. Didn't the Giselle schedule, which tested the intelligence of children, make a correlative between intelligence and walking early?
Yes.
And I would think it probably would have been negative.
No, it was not. It was positive.
Well, the
motor skills on the Giselle schedule indicated that earlier precocious walking children, there was a correlation between that and high intelligence.
This may be true. It might be true within a group. I'm not sure of that.
Well, maybe
I know that there is a correlation in terms of things earlier than walking. At the 6-month stage, Nancy Bailey at Berkeley has established that white children who come from the most advanced families and who later, when they become older, are out at the top, at the first 6 months they are relatively retarded compared to children who are from families of less accomplishment and who don't go as far. But this, so there are a number of these things certainly to be brought in.
Fine.
But this
Giselle schedule is a very authentic, accepted, institutional psychological experiment.
And so is the Nancy Bailey early test.
I'd like to take another call. You're on Black Journal. Go ahead, please.
Hello. This question is addressed to Dr. Welsing. First, I would like to say that Mr. Brown and Dr. Welsing disprove immediately Dr. Shockley's concept, because here we have two highly intelligent, gifted people. And but getting this out of the way, Dr. Welsing, wouldn't you agree that there is a strong genetic component to the inheritance of intelligence? Geneticists believe that 80% component is hereditary. Let me finish, Dr. Welsing. And then also, I think the association of skin color
sterilization. It sounds real familiar, don't it?
Is an erroneous concept. And I want your views on this. Isn't it true that the historic fate of black people, the tragic deprivation, the conditions under which they were raised, any people raised under these conditions would have an hereditary evolutionary background which could lead to poor capacity to generalize, to conceptualize, to be creative in the form field of ideas, and develop other excellent attributes. Now, this is not a racist idea. This could happen to any group who has a tragic history of the black people.
Thank you.
No, I do not feel that there's any evidence to suggest that 80% of the ability to come to terms with your environment that has to do with heredity. I think that much of it has to do with the environmental opportunity that the genetic material is exposed to. I think that if we look at the black people, if we just take the black group, and we look at those people who have been able to achieve, and we look at their backgrounds, we will find that they have had substantial social and economic opportunities that maybe some of the segment of the black population has not had. We will find the same thing in the white group. Those white people who have been socioeconomically deprived and at the bottom of the economic scale for whites, that these people are not performing in the same way that people who have extended socioeconomic opportunity. One of the very interesting things is that white women are now talking about women's liberation, and they are looking at their performance relative to white men, and they are saying, and all of the spokesmen for white women, and men and women are also saying, that the reason that the white woman has less confidence in her performance and is not performing as well, relatively speaking, as the white male has been the attitudes within the white family as to the role of the woman versus the role of the man. Now, what is interesting is that when white people are looking at the difference in the performance of the white woman and the white man on IQ tests, they can account for that on the basis of environmental influences. However, when they shift over into looking at whites relative to people of color, somehow they want to drop that understanding and that awareness.
The Queen was sharp.
It's been interesting, to say the least. I'm happy you had your say, Dr. Shockley, and Dr. Welsing. I'm happy you had yours, and thank you for being on Black Journal.
Yeah, man. But we're not done. We're not done. We're not done. Don't worry about that. But that's Frances Cress Welsing, and that was just a brief debate she had with Shockley.
Continuing wake of the discussion, the historic discussion of black genetic inferiority. I mean, a couple of years ago we were being bombarded with violence in the black community related to black people's genetics, but not anybody else's violence being related to their genetics. And so now Charles Murray is coming out, and Richard Herrenstein, that black genetic inferiority. And as a matter of fact, Tony, I'm very happy about it. The reason being is that 24 years ago, in my paper, The Cress Theory of Color Confrontation and Racism, White Supremacy, I said that the population that classifies itself as white has to continue to focus on color, genetics, sex, and numbers. And so 24 years after having made that statement, here we go again. So I'm not at all surprised, and I'm glad to have the Cress theory again validated.
Now, in both Dr. Shockley's conclusion and in the Belkhurst conclusion is the conclusion that blacks are uneducable and that public policy needs to be shaped to understand, to conform with the, quote, fact that no amount of money is going to rehabilitate or rehabilitate whichever you choose. Black people in this country.
Exactly.
What are the implications?
Well, I think, again, the implications, first of all, we need to understand that this discussion doesn't occur in the vacuum. It occurs within what I call a global, national, local system of white supremacy. Now, what do I mean by that? I maintained, and have for the past quarter century, that the behavior that we see, including this focusing, comes about because the white population on the planet is a tiny minority population. It's not people of color who are the minorities. Whites are fewer than 1/10 of the population on the planet. Number two, and perhaps most importantly, white. You see, when white people say, I am white, they are talking genetically about a genetic recessive characteristic that is a variant of albinism, not defined by Frances Welsing. Now that genetic recessive characteristic plus the minority status means that the white population can conceivably be genetically annihilated by genetically dominant black, brown, red, and yellow people in terms of skin coloration. So my thesis in the Cress theory was that all of the behavior, you see, the repression of blacks, the attack on black males in particular, the lynching, the castration, the obsession with saying something is wrong with your genetics, because at a subconscious level, whites are aware we are the population on the planet that is genetically vulnerable.
Now, let me give you one exception that I know of, and that is Brazil. During slavery in Brazil, racism as a premise for slavery was as uncommon as racism was a premise for slavery in the United States. And in a Brazil, the white population is diminishing, and the black population is diminishing, and the population in the middle, which is a miscegenated population, is the one that's growing. So I think there.
Well, but see, I would say, Tony, that still you
I
go.
just want to finish one point. I just, in my point, I'm not trying to cut you off, but I think my point is, I don't want to sound too abstract. My point is that in some parts of the world, whites don't seem to be as fearful of what you refer to as annihilation, perhaps, as in the United States.
Well, I would still say if one goes to Brazil,
put some meat on your brain, some knowledge in there, you know what I'm saying?
Controls the banking centers, it will be a population of people that say we are white.
That's
you see, and at the same time, if you go to the favelas and into the slums, do you see the darkest and the blackest population.
And you're right. And the only thing I'm saying is that population, and that population culturally is very different from the United States. And
racism
wasn't the premise for slavery there, but it was the premise for slavery in the United States.
Well, you see, I say that there, in other words, there are variations on the theme.
Mm-hmm.
There's variation in terms of the particular language that the discussion is carried out in. But you never get away from, if you're black, stay back, brown, stick around, yellow, mellow, white, right. You see, and the more color you have to cause white genetic annihilation, then the more pressure that is put on you. So this hierarchy of color, whether you're in Asia, whether you're in Africa, whether you're in Latin America, Central America, this still obtains, but I don't want us to get lost.
Okay, but I do want to get back to a primary point here, because I think we've jumped over it, and that is the bell curve. And let me just say this, it's not just the bell curve.
Absolutely, Ross.
The week that the bell curve came out, 2 other books came out on the same subject, and they've had so much success. The cover of Time magazine, Newsweek, U.S. News and World Report had a feature story, New York Times 2 weeks in a row, very prominent play. The media just grabbed onto this idea. Now, with this happening, there's going to be a plethora of books on this very, very subject.
Precisely.
Now, in this new wave, unlike Shockley
this was
and
the
Jensen,
70s,
to a lesser
75,
extent,
I would say
the focus is on, quote, data, meaning that someone is empirically saying that they can demonstrate that there is biological inferiority among blacks, and that it turns on one statistic, and that one statistic is that blacks make, on average, and they were careful to say not individuals but average, because it never could have gotten off the ground with individuals, because too many black individuals are exceptions to this rule. But on average, blacks make 15 points less than whites. Now, what is your direct refutation of that alleged empirical evidence?
Well, do you see, I would say this, that first of all, I'm a psychiatrist, a general psychiatrist, child psychiatrist. We've always looked at IQ test as being very directly related to the environment. Now, if someone doesn't want to closely examine the environment, all of the dimensions of the environment, then someone could easily say, well, it's not the environment that makes the difference. Do you see, I maintain that it is the environment that makes the difference. And on Sunday,
this woman is someone I consider an elder.
Article was in one of the major newspapers in Washington, D.C., where a young white male, senior at University of Maryland, had his skin darkened, and he went to the South. He could have stayed in Maryland, but he went to the South. He was going to be black because he did not believe when blacks would say it's racism, it's racism. He thought that that was really just an excuse. So he had his skin darkened by a dermatologist, and he went to the South, and he could only tolerate the oppression for 2 days before he came running home and crying to his mother. I can't deal with it. I can't deal with it. Now, what I'm saying is that here is someone who can, you know, the chemical is not given, and so he turns back white. He knew he had that escape, but he couldn't tolerate the insults in the restaurant, the various day-to-day, 24 hours a day, 7 day a week assaults at a person of color on his psyche that the person experiences.
Not physically.
Not physically,
psychologically.
you see, but it's not generally talked about. You see, in other words, he talked about such things as being ignored when he would go into a restaurant, you see, or someone saying niggers are, you know, no good. Just on and on and on and on.
Now, that's one that overt racism, overt
Well, I won't even call it overt.
Okay, but
I might call, you see, shooting or lynching overt, but I'm talking about the very subtle things.
All right, and you're right. What I would like to do, however, is to identify some other environmental factors that would contribute to this 15-point gap. You've identified one.
Okay.
The subtle erosion of self-esteem, the subtle psychological implantation of the feeling of inferiority, which must manifest itself somewhere under some circumstance. But apart from that, what are some of the other environmental factors that
well,
you
if we understand racism is a system that is operative in all areas of activity: economics, education, entertainment, labor, law, politics, religion, sex, and war. And so this barrage, full court press, is coming at you on a daily basis. If it impacts economics and labor, this means, as is the case in large numbers of black families, you're talking about a one-parent family as opposed to a two-parent family. You're talking about disparage in inadequacies or inequities in terms of wages, and all of this begins to impact on what it is that is happening in that critical unit that we call the family unit. And if that unit cannot function in a supportive manner, for example, black infants, when they are born, in the first 9 months of life are accelerated compared to white infants.
Now, how are they accelerated? How do you mean
they're
that?
accelerated in terms of such things as smiling, holding up their heads, recognition
Motor
of
activity.
faces, and motor activity. Do you see? And smiling is also intellectual activity. But with the assault of this environment in a highly structured environment that I say is structured for the purpose of white genetic survival, do you see that this begins to then take its toll? It's as though you have two races, two people running a race. One, you tie weights around their ankles, and everything else is equal, but one has weights tied around his or her ankles.
I've seen a number of studies, and frequently
in a whole nother way.
they seem to cluster around something happening to a black child around 7 years of age. Have you identified that age at all?
Well,
I see it everywhere. Around 7, something happens to the black child. They grow tremendously up to that point, and then all of a sudden there's a fall.
Well, you see, the child has entered school at that point.
What do I say?
And upon entering school, I mean, try to think about, when I think about what first grade was like, do you see, it was Dick and Jane and Spot and Puff, and a white family. It wasn't anything about a black family. It was a white family. All the pictures were white. All the presidents were white. Everybody that you focused on that was doing anything, Goldilocks, Snow White, everybody is white, including a white Christmas, a white bunny rabbit. You see, so that the child is taking all of this information in about the environment and how he or she is valued or looked upon in the environment. Just learning the English language. You learn that white is pure and black is evil, black is bad. If the stock market falls, it's a Black Tuesday
Black skin,
or
white
Black
mask,
Monday.
by Franz
Bottom line,
Fanon.
does a 15-point disparity
on
IQ exams make blacks genetically inferior?
That's a
Well,
source.
I would
That's
say
a reference.
absolutely
Black
no.
skin,
You
white
see,
mask,
we want to
Franz
get down to
Fanon.
genetics. White is a genetic
ISIS papers,
mutation
Francis Cress Welsing.
from black. It is albinism. The earliest people, the first people on the planet were black people. And black people produced albinos, and you mix the two together, you get the whole human family. So I say, no, it doesn't mean that, but I want to move.
Just give them some good
Let's
gems
assume
for
for the
today.
purpose of argument that let's say black people are 50 points below white people. You see, according to their tests, the bottom line is, okay, Dr. Murray, Dr. Jensen, Dr. Shockley, Dr. Herenstein, what is it that you intend to do about this? Do you see? Are you saying, therefore, your model is Adolf Hitler and company? So we have decided that you are inferior. The bottom line is, what are you going to do about it? Because there are many children, white, black, brown, red, or yellow, who are damaged genetically, congenitally. We say they're mentally retarded. Now, we have special schools. We do everything to help these children. We put them in small classes. We give them 3 or 4 teachers. We give them all kinds of things to try to exploit the genetic potential. But now somebody comes along and says a 15-point difference means we cannot expect anything from these people. Well, if we cannot expect anything and the global economy is declining, well, gosh, we're back with Adolf. Do you see? Well, we just cannot tolerate this debris in our population.
If I may, and I want you to continue your point. I don't want to interrupt. I do want to say this. I read an editorial recently on the editorial page of the Wall Street Journal, not a newspaper to take lightly. And the writer was very favorable, anti the bell curve. This was not a racist writing an article. It was a very, very objective, fair editorial. And he mentioned the eugenics movement that the Chinese are involved in terms of in China, of culling out the bottom and reproducing the top. And he concluded that if the liberals kept on making more out of
you want to get a
the
better
bell curve than
understanding
it
of
is,
eugenics,
we may see,
get
quote,
medical
a Beijing solution
I don't know how to say
in
that
the
word.
United
Well, let's
States.
not go to a
By
Beijing
Harriet
solution
Washington.
where we have
That's
a
a good
Nazi
book to get.
Germany solution. Do you understand
It's-
where it wasn't just a population? I mean, there have been many populations. If a child is born
412
defective,
pages.
do you see, they do not allow that child to go on and
I got it
exist.
sitting
That's
on my
quite
desk, too.
different. That's quite different than saying there are populations of
That's
people.
another
You
reference,
see,
another
that
source.
are superfluous and that are a contaminant, and we need to be pure and clean so that we can really arrive where we're supposed to arrive. We're back in Nazi Germany. So I say that, first of all, we have to recognize Nazi Germany was about white supremacy. It was about the white genetic population feeling that it was vulnerable to an assault by people whose real genetic origin began in North Africa.
Shout out to True
You see,
Life
their
Stories
religion
YouTube
was
channel.
not the critical issue. The issue was that they had their origins in a population that was classified as non-white. And so I say that we need to not debate numbers, because God forbid, but Dr. Murray or his grandchildren
Absolutely, NFC.
might come out with an IQ difference 15 points lower than his.
My next question will operate on the premise that your statement there is objective. Therefore, I will go to the next point. If what you're saying is true, are blacks doing anything to accelerate a process toward a, quote, final solution? Blacks themselves?
No. Do you see, the people of color on the planet who are being approached by people who have all these genetic issues in their minds, and they don't understand that white supremacy mindset, or the mindset that is feeling vulnerable to white genetic annihilation. So you have a big population conference in Cairo. To the extent that people of color on the planet do not understand this mindset, it's like being at the chessboard and not understanding the game with all of the people of color on the planet on the black side of the chessboard. And you have white supremacy, or the dynamic for white genetic survival, moving against this group of people. Now, I believe, instead of getting emotionally upset about Charles Murray's position or anybody who is in that group of thinkers, I believe, again, take out the Cress theory, see where all of this has been laid out before, predicting how this mindset operates, and begin to place oneself in a mode of understanding what the game is that is on the table.
If I can summarize the game is going to turn on public opinion. Hitler only did what he was able to do, and he was only able to do certain things because he had organized German public opinion. What, if anything, are blacks or some blacks doing in terms of accelerating a negative public opinion, or a public opinion that could come back to bite them? That's
all
my,
right, well,
that's my point.
let's take an example. A person who considers him or herself to be an actor, television actor, black, who doesn't understand this white supremacy dynamic. So somebody comes along and offers them a job, you see, but they have to act as a clown and a buffoon, and they just think, well, I'm in the abstract being an actor or an actress. Unbeknownst to them, it's a whole context in which this role is being carried out, where people feel, who have set up this image, that they need to be reinforced. See, look at blacks. They're clowns. They're stupid. They're buffoons. Look at this. This is trash.
Let's look at daytime television. Look at it for me, will you, with the eyes of a psychiatrist.
All right, the daytime talk shows.
Yes.
All right, I would say
1974,
that there are many
1975.
black people that are being tapped. I don't know where they go to find these people. Do you see? But it's this. If it's the parallel would be, if a white person who's putting on a television show decides, let me go and get the least advantaged white person and put them up on the television, continue, not the most beautiful, the most articulate, the most intelligent. No, let me go to the poorest area where there are white people, and then put them up continually as a
Welsing. The first half was her debate, and they held it in a real professional way. You know, that's how the panel should be held, and that's how the panels are held that I'm on. That's how you debate. We shouldn't be arguing. Fuck arguing. Debate or be quiet until you can come back and talk. We say communication is key. The Queen is a great speaker. She was sharp with her words, but so that soft voice, you know, she'd still tear you up though. But some of the references and sources that I talked about once again was I don't know how to say this word, so deal with it. Medical apartheid, the dark history of medical experimentation on Black Americans from colonial times to the present by Harriet A. Washington. That's the first reference. That's the first source. When they talk about eugenics and things like that, that gives great insight on that. Francis Cress Welsing's book, The ISIS Papers, The Keys to the Colors. Like I said, it's only 300 pages. Very dope book. Very dope book. And another one that I didn't actually say, you know, it wouldn't be a King God stream if I didn't give some type of references and sources, right? The third book that I would recommend is The Iceman Inheritance, Prehistoric Sources of Western Man's Racism, Sexism, and Aggression, with a new introduction by John Henrik Clarke, who we'll get into soon. And that is by Michael Bradley. That's 3 books, 3 references. One of the books being The Speakers, which is Francis Cress Welsing. That being said, guys, I hope you appreciate these live streams. You know, just food for thought, better understanding on certain things, maybe a reminder to some people, maybe just a refreshment for others. For me, it was just, I enjoy these. You know, this is one of the master teachers, or who I personally would consider a master teacher, an elder, not an older. Like I was saying, there's a difference between an older and an elder. Francis Cress, to me, in my personal opinion, is an elder. So if you didn't know about her, these last 2 videos was a good introduction. Go check her out. We'll be getting into so many different people. And I'm going to just do these from time to time. Or consistently, shit. I just like doing it. With that being said, family, I hope you enjoy it. Appreciate all the support. Keep supporting me. Support a real channel, solid person. With that being said, I love y'all. I appreciate y'all. And I'm going to see y'all later.